That's right, thank you. I'm a teacher, and I have been a science teacher for 35 years. And I'm standing because I think all the main parties, the three main parties, have actually let us down. And I think they're all committed to austerity, making workers and the poor pay for the crisis that we're in. And I just think it's time that ordinary people had a chance of voting for something a bit different. Because we're always told that there isn't any money around to pay for wages, homes, public services, claimants, disabled people, migrants are all being demonised. And young people are facing mounting student debts, lack of real jobs and serious housing. Our environment's being trashed by corporate interests, and women are bearing the burden of collapsing public services. And we're told that we've got to tighten our belts. Well, I think there's an alternative out there. I think the alternative is that we've actually got to start and make the people pay for the crisis, the same people that caused the crisis. And that's the main reason why I'm standing.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much, Darren.
Some of those points that Darren's raised, I completely agree with, because we hear about these new jobs that are being created under the Tory government. Vast majority of these jobs are part-time jobs, very low-paid jobs, so therefore people aren't earning enough money to be able to pay tax. But there's another angle that you can come at this. I don't think this is a poor country. We're the 7th richest country in the world. I think it's about priorities. And what I would do is I would scrap Trident. There's 100 billion that can be saved from scrapping Trident. I would get back the 120 billion pounds that there is out there in tax evasion. I would start and get some of the profits back off the gas, the electricity, the oil companies. I would renationalise the railways and restructure the economy. I don't accept the argument that we're a poor country and therefore we have to tighten our belts, the poorest people in society. And I have to say, there are only 15 MPs in Parliament who did not walk through that door to vote for £30 billion worth of cuts. And those £30 billion worth of cuts are going to affect the poorest people in our society. And I think that is a really, really dangerous road to go down. So my argument is that we should reorganise the society. We should look at getting back money from tax avoidance, from tax evasion. We should renationalise these major companies. We should scrap Trident, and we should start investing in proper jobs for our young people so that they actually have a future to go to. Absolutely none. There are no guarantees that that will happen, because we can look to an example that happened. You read out some examples earlier, but there was between Australia and Hong Kong, there was a trade deal that was made between them, and the Australian government were then sued because by a big tobacco company because they were selling their cigarettes under plain packaging, and they were millions of pounds out of pocket because of that. And I think this is why TTIP has to be opposed completely, because it is very dangerous. I just want you to give you an example that was raised at the NUT conference. One of the big companies, Pearson, is planning to sell testing for 4-year-olds to all schools, and it'll be compulsory that all 4-year-olds will have to be tested. These test scores will be noted nationally, and they will track those children all the way through their educational career. Absolutely appalling. As educationalists in the NUT, we're completely opposed to it. If this is adopted and then the government is made to climb down from this, then it is quite possible that Pearson will be able to sue the government for all the money, not only that it's lost, but all the money that it potentially will lose in the future. So I think it's a very dangerous precedent, and I think that that's why we have to make sure that we campaign as vigorously as we can against TTIP and ISDS. And it doesn't mean that they're going to win, because it's all done under secrecy, and there's a big campaign being raised at the moment to ensure that we can start to fight back. And I believe on the 18th of April there's going to be a national day of action against TTIP, and I hope that people will come out and support that.
Thank you very much. Charlotte.
Thank you. Well, obviously, you know, Trade Union Socialist Coalition is completely against zero-hour contracts, because I want to, the same as you've done, dispel this myth about zero-hour contracts being something that are quite nice, and actually people really like them. Let me give you a real reality situation. My son was on a zero-hour contract, and he worked in, and he was a student at the time, and he worked in the cinema in town, that new cinema when it opened, really fancy, zazzy cinema that you pay a lot of money to go in and see films in. And when Danny would turn up on a Saturday night, where he'd not gone out anywhere 7:30, after half an hour, they would tell him to go home because they didn't really need him that night. And his whole day had been sort of organised around waiting to go to work, 7:30, he got paid half an hour for his zero-hour contract. Or the young woman I met, actually used to teach, who worked in a call centre, who told me they called her up in the morning to cancel work that she thought she would have because she was on a zero-hour contract. And the difference for those people really means that they have to think about putting food on the table. You cannot plan your life. We're not talking about people earning £20 an hour. We're talking about people on a minimum wage on a zero-hour contract. It's absolutely disgusting. And I think this austerity, the ideology that we've had from the coalition government, has allowed austerity to allow business to use zero-hour contracts so they can make more profit. So it's not about balancing the books and getting rid of the deficit. It's allowing those big companies to get richer and to make more profit off the backs of ordinary working class people. Well, I think under the present coalition government that we've got already, you know, privatisation is well underway in the health service. There's absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. I mean, we've got the example in Bristol where we've seen Emerson Green, where, you know, run by a private company, being given so much money to do treatment regardless of whether or not they do it. They don't do the treatment. Where does the money go? Into the pockets of the company. We've got a ridiculous situation. Can I just finish? We've got a ridiculous situation where we have at the moment agency workers in hospitals, where you have these private companies charging hospitals, now I couldn't believe this figure, £1,300 a shift. That money is not going to nurses, that money is going into the pockets of private healthcare providers. So let's not deny it, under this government the privatisation is steamrolling ahead. And I mean, it's not, as you've said, it's not surprising really. The number of Tory MPs who have links with private healthcare companies is quite astounding really. And £1 of every NHS contracts that have been outsourced, 15p has been contracted to Tory supporters. And I have to say that I am not completely convinced about the Labour Party's position. I think it is fantastic that they are going to cancel the Health and Social Care Act, and that is a brilliant step forward. But there were privatisation initiatives that were started under the Labour government that have not been reversed. So, and you only have to watch the TV. How many adverts do we see for private healthcare? How many services have already been outsourced? Dentistry is one, isn't it? You know, people shouldn't have to pay to go to the dentist. It should all be under the NHS. So I think the whole question of is the NHS safe under the Tory and coalition party? Absolutely not. Is it safe under the Labour Party? It's not going far enough. We need to reverse all the privatisation that we've seen. The health service is just too important to be messed about with by private sector. You see, this is the problem when we run things in society for profit and not for what's best for society and best for all of us. And we're in a mess now with in terms of global warming and the levels of carbon dioxide emissions, simply because that's the policy that we've had. It's been run for profit. And all the way through the 70s, the 80s and the 90s, when scientists were pointing out there were real problems with using carbon fuels and the levels of carbon dioxide, it was ignored and the research was stummified in order to make sure that, you know, they could make as much profit as they could. And I think fracking is a bad idea. I think for contamination of the water table, I think it's, again, the use of fossil fuels. I think there's a real problem there. And I think instead of spending that money, we should be spending the money on putting a solar panel on everybody's house, wind turbines. Bristol's a really hilly place. We should be putting lots and lots of wind turbines out. And the Severn barrage, I don't think that's something that has been explored enough, really. I think there are alternative sources of energy, and we just have to start prioritising that and putting our money and our resources and our research into finding clean solutions that aren't going to contaminate the planet and make it any worse than it is. Well, you see, I think the danger with the referendum is it's posed under the guise of something else. We see it posed by UKIP under the guise of anti-migrant, where they're actually attempting to blame migrant workers for the ills of what's happened in society. And they use the anti-European idea of having a vote in a way of doing that. Now, in TUSC, we're against borders. We think people should be able to move freely. We think we have got things in equal and shared values with people all around the world. We don't believe in false borders. We think the real problem is the people that run us, the people that take all the profit, the people that make everything from us, and that this argument that comes up from UKIP about the European Union is actually a very dangerous one. There are lots of very good things that have come out of Europe. I mean, there's legislation in terms of health and safety legislation, there's really good equal opportunities legislation, which has come out that protect workers. So all those things that are good that have come out of the European Union, I think we should defend, and those things that are bad, I think we should fight against them. And just on a question like that, I mean, I'm just looking at Syriza and Greece, which someone's raised already. I think, you know, what they're doing at present is they're actually maybe going to stand up to the European Union and say, we're not going to pay back your debt. And I think that might pose very interesting times ahead for all of us. Well, I think it's a really nice question to answer, really, because I think when we look back at what's happened, the austerity crisis was caused by the chaos that the banks got us all into. And it was built on gambling and greed and taking massive investments. And what happened was that we were able to bail them out by giving them millions and millions and millions of pounds. Now, I think one of the opportunities that we would have, because we have got partial ownership of the Lloyds Bank and the Royal Bank of Scotland, is for us to take control of those banks and make sure that we actually take the profits that are made and plough them back into society. Because I think that is one of the ways in which we can start to tackle the disproportionation that we've got in society between the haves and the have-nots. Because what it seems to me is that everything is going one direction. It's all going for the 1% and not the 99%. And I think we start readjust things so that we actually start putting money back into the 99% of people. Yeah, I think it actually is quite a simple question to answer, really. It's about what are the alternatives? The reason why there are homeless people living in Bristol is because of the attacks that have been suffered by the poorest in society in terms of benefit attacks on the services that they've used, like, for example, mental health services, which haven't had the right funding. And the alternative to that is to start really taking the money back from the places that we should do. I mean, you know, let's take back the 108 billion spent on Trident, the 120 billion on tax evasion. Let's rationalise the railways. Let's get that money and put it back into the places where it can really be used and utilised. We heard what the gentleman there was saying about the IMF saying about the banks. There's the other answer as well. The money is there. The problem is the people that are paying for this recession are the poorest, the most disadvantaged people in our society, and it can't go on. And let me tell you that both parties, in fact, three main parties and UKIP, voted for the next £30 billion worth of cuts in the next session that comes in of Parliament. 12 billion of those are being proposed to be benefit cuts. Can you imagine how many more homeless people we are going to see in the streets of Bristol? How many more families are going to be dependent on food banks if this continues? We've got to put an end to it, and I think there is an alternative. I think people are sick of it, and they actually want to see an anti-austerity solution.
Thank you.
I think we have to remember that all three main parties, including UKIP, have voted for the £30 billion worth of cuts that are coming our way. So when you're making your decision up who you're going to vote for, I think you need to have that very clear in your mind. There is an alternative, and I've laid the alternative out quite clearly tonight, a different way forward, a way to making a better world, in which is fairer, which doesn't blame the poorest and most weakest people in society. But I also think we need to think very carefully about what happens if there isn't a clear alternative, because what we're hearing from the three main parties, a bit different from the Labour Party in the last few days, I would say, because I think they begin to understand there is a mood for an anti-austerity party. But if we don't put that forward and say there is a better solution, we open the danger of the right wing being able to get in. And we've seen that in parts of Europe where we've seen the rise of Golden Dawn, far-right organisations. I think as a socialist, it is very important that we go out there and we campaign about an alternative that gives people hope, because that's what people need. They need some hope in the future.